Welcome to this post-election edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, so you have a better grasp of what's really going on all around. And of course, let's begin by sending out our heartfelt thoughts to all those who are working diligently to help the University of Virginia community and all the families in and around that were shocked earlier this week by the murders of 3 football players in the investigation that continues there. So many holes, and we are watching this with grave intent. And again, our heart breaks for any family rent asunder in such a way. And we will let you know as we get any information here and, of course, through our affiliate stations. So stand by for them. Joining us to kick off this post-election wrap-up show is the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative and senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation, and our partner in the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance and our voting integrity work here at the Virginia Institute. He is Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, welcome back to the program. How are you doing this morning?
Well, like a lot of people, I think I'm still recovering from the election and very, very late nights and counts going on for days after the election.
Well, you say this much about Virginia's election. At least we're not Arizona. Don't know if that's...
Well, at least we're not Nevada either.
Yeah, and I want to get into Nevada because there's a whole second page on Nevada and what they voted to approve there with the, what is it, the Take 5 is a lottery game, the Final 5.
Yes.
But I want to begin, how is it that people don't see the inherent concerns that an average person is going to have as they watch a place like Arizona, where people are just showing up for days on end with baskets full of votes saying, yeah, here's precinct number 9. And it's like, well, where did that come from? How is this still coming in? Where are these all coming from? And not stop and say, how did we allow all this to metastasize to the way we conduct elections?
Well, I think everyday folks who are working hard and not thinking about the election process probably don't realize that there's been this intense fight going on now for years with folks mostly on the left side of the political aisle trying to loosen and get rid of all of the security protocols that we've developed over the past 100 years to protect the election process and to take Election Day and stretch it out to months before and now weeks after Election Day so that we no longer really have an Election Day. And when you do that, when you do those kinds of things, you're going to cause problems, and like I said, you're going to create security holes that some who are willing to take advantage of that, they will.
There was a report earlier this year, Associated Press reported something that you and I talked about years ago, and I think at least I got called a conspiracy theorist and a fearmonger for reporting on the issues with the Dominion voting machines. But now we even have the CISA report that says, yeah, well, maybe the Dominion machines are everything Hans von Spakovsky told Joe Thomas that they could wind up being. And you just completely skidded past so many people. And yet here was one of the concerns and machines used here in Virginia as well. The federal cybersecurity watchdog saying, yeah, these can actually be hacked.
Well, yeah, that's a real problem. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the recommendation I've long made to folks is to make sure that if, for example, they're using, computer scanners to count ballots, you've got to maintain the actual paper ballots that folks filled out because that's the audit trail. in case there's any problems with the computer equipment. Also, and this is really important, county governments, particularly in Virginia, the computer systems that they use to upload the votes that they're getting from all the various polls and precincts, those need to be standalone systems. They should not be tied into the county's wide network, because doing that then gives those county-wide networks have internet access. And you've got to ensure that you have isolated computer systems that can't be hacked into through pathways coming in over the internet. And that's just basic right. Security protocols that we need to ensure that is being followed, everywhere in Virginia and certainly in other states too.
Well, it would be like, and I know you're a lawyer, Hans, but we won't hold that against you. It would be like telling a jury, listen, while you deliberate, why don't you go out to the pub and deliberate there and come back and promise us that nothing happened and nobody slipped you a 50 to change your ruling on the court trial, because that's basically what you're letting happen there with this. And this, again, feeds into this feeling that a lot of voters have. They don't like the scanned ballots. They feel like there's just a certain amount. And I've told them in the past. I mean, I have the great old pictures of the guy walking out of the bar in Illinois after the 1960 primary with boxes of ballots. So long before we had computers doing our elections, there were people doing fraud. But we just seem, as you said earlier, to insist on making it easier for people to play fast and loose in the gray areas than just saying every valid voter cast one valid vote and be done with it.
Yeah, and this is made worse by the complete loosening of rules regarding absentee and mail-in ballots. Many states now are saying, oh, well, yeah, you don't have to have your ballot in by Election Day. They're allowing it to come in after Election Day. That's one of the reasons we're getting all these delayed results in many states. And that gives folks the ability to manipulate election results, and I'll just give you a quick example, one, if I may. Some states are saying, well, it's okay as long as it's got a postmark on it to show that it was put in the mail by Election Day. Well, Joe, you know this. How many private companies, private businesses have their own postmarking machines?
Sure. Oh,
that
gosh.
Use those to postmark it, put the date on it, and then slip it into a mailbox, and the post office doesn't re-stamp it. So that, if I wanted to steal an election using absentee ballots in a state like that, well, you could wait till after Election Day and then find out which individuals haven't voted and try to send out absentee ballots in their names. And that's particularly easy in a state like Nevada that has no ID requirement of any kind.
Right. And of all the states to do that, a place like Nevada is that. We're visiting with Hans von Spakovsky and our partner with our election integrity operations here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but he's the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Ed Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation as well. Hans, you mentioned our Nevada. Nevada has voted in favor of something called the Final Five. And I just spoke to the fellow who's long been a conservative activist, a friend of mine, who is leading the charge on these Final Five. And I queried him. I said, you're coming on my show, and I'm a skeptic about it because I don't like the way these ranked choice vote systems work. I never have. But he was gleefully pointing to the governor, the Democrat governor that opposed it, lost, and this Final Five plan for ranked choice voting was approved by these mysterious Nevada voters. Here is the director of TakeBackAction.org, John Pudner, on with me explaining the voting system that just passed in Nevada.
The Final Five proposal, I think, is very good. And just to give you quickly how it would work, parties can still do a firehouse primary or convention, whatever they did, to pick their candidate, step one. Step two, you go to an open primary. That's where some conservatives are hung up, but I would argue that's actually very good, because instead of Republicans spending millions of dollars attacking each other and coming up bloody into the general election, you keep a couple of strong Republicans on the ballot, and then you go to general election. The top 5 in that primary make the general election. You've got it down to a manageable number, and then you do rank the top 5 in order. The reason I love that is, I'll give you an example. Wisconsin, we just lost a close governor's race. Once again, the Democrats funded a conservative independent, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on her, only targeted conservatives, saying vote for her instead of the Republican. We fought back and beat them down, so we got her down to 1%, but the enormous effort we put into that. And liberals are just very good at funding these smaller candidates now, taking 2, 3, 4% with a libertarian, Constitution Party candidate, whoever. I think it solves that, and I'm happy to have 2 great Republicans turning people out for a general election and then all picking each other as their second choice. I wouldn't have cared if Peter Snyder or someone was still on the ballot last election. He's still getting people out. I think Youngkin would have still won. I think it would have improved his margin. So anyway, I think final 5 as a system works, as opposed to what New York did, where you kind of throw 13 candidates on a ballot and have to somehow rank them.
Be on the watch out for it. It is called the Final 5, and it's not an NCAA bracket. We'll be right back with Michael Maybach next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Take us into, if there is even the possibility that the way they do this Final 5 ranked choice voting is maybe better than the way they did it in New York or even Alaska?
I just don't think any form of ranked choice voting is a good thing. For folks who don't even know what that means, it means that if there are 5 people in a race, you don't vote for one person, you vote for all 5 by ranking them according to who's your first choice all the way down to your 5th choice. The problem with that is that if your first choice doesn't get a majority of the vote, well, then that first choice, those first choice votes get thrown out, and your second ranked choice becomes your first choice, and they do a new round of voting. And in places where they've put in ranked choice voting, in New York, for example, they tried it for the first time in their last mayor's race, and I think they went through 8 or 9 counts.
Until somebody got to 50, right? That's
Until
what
somebody
it is, yeah.
got to 50, because there were so many candidates in the race. And of course, if you only ranked, if you're in the 5th recount and you only ranked 4 of the voters, guess what? You don't even have a ballot in the 5th recount. And in the New York race, so many people didn't rank all the candidates that by the time they got to the end, the ballots of 140,000 people had been thrown out.
It's unbelievable. Plus, it again leaves us with that feeling like, hold it, how many votes did this guy get? How many residents are there in Mark? And I gave the Republican Party of Virginia a certain amount of leeway using ranked choice voting here in Virginia when Governor Northam was insisting they couldn't hold an in-person convention. So they used it to replicate elimination votes the way it would happen in a convention, in an in-person convention setting. Okay, well, the low vote getter is eliminated. Now all their votes will go to whoever their second choice was. But I worry that that's left the tent flap open for the camel to walk in.
Well, it's true. And the other thing that people should keep in mind, and this is what I think is really bad about ranked choice voting, is look, if no candidate gets above 50% and you have a runoff election several weeks later, as is going to happen in Georgia, that gives folks a time to reevaluate their choices. It gives them a chance to once again review who those candidates are, what they stand for, what they have said and done, how they've acted in the election, all of which is important to the choice you make. If you have to rank all of the candidates in a race on election day, you don't get that second opportunity to review what happened and make a decision. And again, I just don't think that's a good way to do things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And let's take it a step further, because when you see the early voting and then ranked choice voting added together, I think you've created a scenario where, I mean, first off, you're going to have to be some sort of cybermetric accountant whiz to take in all the variables. I just don't know how any of this leaves people feeling like their choice got elected to these offices, regardless of how powerful that we may wish they are or aren't.
Well, no, that's in fact true. And if you look at many of the municipalities, it's mostly in places like Washington State, Oregon, California, they've put in this ranked choice voting. What you find is that, for example, the mayors that get elected under this system, they're often folks who the vast majority of voters did not support. They weren't their first choice. So you're getting people into office that maybe were the first choice of like 25% of the voters. So you're electing people who really don't have the mandate, I don't think, of voters to actually carry out the duties of their office. Somebody who was the first choice of 25% of the voters, people are going to question everything that he or she does.
Well, so what is on the horizon? Everyone said, and we won't even get into the specifics of the whys. There was no red wave because I think there are things involving this election that had very little to do with the voting, but the spending. And maybe we can speak to that a little bit, because yet again, the specter of campaign finance reform has come up. Only this time it's conservatives, because they watched Mitch McConnell use money raised by Republican office holders to work against other Republicans. And so there's concern about that. Has the pendulum on campaign finance reform swung to the Republican Party now and away from the Democratic Party, where it always used to reside?
Well, I think that may be happening, and again, that's a mistake. Every time folks try to put in campaign finance restrictions, the money just finds another different route for flowing into the political process. And every time you try to do that, you are potentially restricting First Amendment rights. I don't like Mark Zuckerberg, and I don't like the positions he takes and the candidates he supports, but any kind of restriction on the spending of money in political campaigns, political activities is, like I said, it's potentially restricting First Amendment rights. And for anybody who thinks, oh, that can't be, just think about the fact that, look, if I want to gather a big crowd and speak to them about what I believe in the political arena, well, I need to have a big stadium to do that. I need to have a big ballroom in a hotel, and that costs money. If I want to if I want to rent a television studio and speak to people, if I'm a candidate, that costs money. So anytime you're restricting spending, you in fact are restricting the ability of folks to speak out on political issues.
Years ago, I was told something that just shocked me. I presumed all the time that all this money spent on political advertising was spent on TV ads and Super Bowl placements and that kind of things. And I was shown that the majority of all campaigns' money are spent on those glossy mailers that I don't know a soul that even looks at. So I don't know who's got the gig printing those, but it's got to be a couple of very wealthy people you've never heard of before. And then second beyond that are yard signs. And two of the most commonplace things in elections are the things that are gobbling up most of this money. So it's not even the TV and radio ads.
No, and the longer we stretch out the election voting period, the more expensive campaigns are going to be. So everybody is pushing for a month, 2 months of early voting, where you're going to make you're going to make campaigns much more expensive, because no candidate can wait to do their main advertising, their get out the vote efforts, their brochures just before Election Day. If they do, if they're not doing that throughout the entire early voting period, they're going to lose.
Without question. Hans von Spakovsky on with us from the Heritage Foundation and our partner with the election reform initiatives. Is there a hope that there are people on the horizon that can put this back? 2023 has already begun, and mainly because of all the new districts. And I like the districts. I think they were holding to the Virginia Constitution's mandate of compact and contiguous. I'm not arguing about that. And I kind of enjoy places where two incumbents have to run against each other because they now live in the same district. But that being said, looking at the Virginia General Assembly 2024, hypothetically, is there a chance that Governor Youngkin gets a bill on his desk that reforms this without riots in the streets?
That's a good question, and frankly, I don't know the answer to that. That is, the issue of partisan gerrymandering has been a huge fight in many different states. And in fact, at the beginning of December, there's going to be a big case about partisan redistricting in the U.S. Supreme Court. It's the Moore case. Mm-hmm. And the case there is all about how much power do state courts have to change or interfere with the redistricting process conducted by state legislatures. And that case is actually going to say a lot about how much power state legislatures have on this issue.
Well, we watched in Virginia, and maybe we just caught lightning in a bottle, but the two special masters appointed by the Virginia Supreme Court seem to have done a pretty good job, where the politicians' gerrymandering became very obvious. And actually, I think their new districts spoke volumes about how the elected officials were protecting their own base rather than, coming up with districts that represented a community interest, because it's such a radically different map than it was before, Hans. And I always push back because in Virginia, we actually didn't have partisan gerrymandering. It was these two, one California professor and a Virginia lawyer that drew these maps. Are you concerned that this is going to be the way most states do it now? Other states did it as well with their courts and a special master drawing districts.
Well, I just am concerned when courts are doing this and special masters who are not accountable to voters. And that's one of the chief things I think people need to keep in mind, is that when legislatures are doing this redistricting, they're accountable to voters at the next election, and you can try to vote out of office a legislator who you think didn't do a good job or didn't do the job you wanted to, including drawing on district lines. But many states are moving to these so-called independent redistricting commissions, which have proven not to be very independent, where you have people appointed to draw these lines, and they're not accountable to voters. And I just don't think that's a good idea. The idea that you're going to get better results from a bureaucracy, we long ago learned that's just not the case.
Hans, we must run. Coming up next, another issue that I know you have a lot to say about is the abolition of the Electoral College and the institution of a national popular vote. I've had Virginia Republicans buttonhole me for days on end about why Republicans should support this. And I said, you really misunderstand that I'm here to help Republicans for any reason. But Michael Maybach is on with the Save Our States initiative coming up next, Hans. So we must run, but thank you for your insight as far as we can get it right now as the election season is drawing to a close.
Well, thanks for having me on, and Michael knows what he's talking about on that issue too.